Hello, everyone, and welcome to this live stream special. I'm super happy that you're joining me, and we're going to learn something today. But don't worry, no tricky questions. It's all going to be really useful, and it's the kind of thing that I wish I knew, because I've set up a business, hooray, but I didn't know what I was doing. And one of those things is that I had to become a leader, and it's very difficult because, it'd be nice if someone was there to help you. On that note, I've got someone who is going to help unpack this topic for us together on how to become an effective leader, give us some examples and all that cool stuff. So without further ado, I've got the lovely Tania, who is founder of Ede Enablers. Tania, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I've waited so long to get on this podcast, so I'm here.
You are here. We were going to get to it. We're going to get to it. Maybe I needed you at this key point now.
I know we needed to build up to something, didn't we? Yeah.
We did do. But Tania, so I'm familiar with the stuff you've done, and I'm sure a lot of people are. But for the benefit of the audience, if the person here is not familiar with yourself, Tania, who are you?
Well, hi, I'm Tania Ihlenfeld, and I'm an architect, author now of Build Success, and I've set up my own business too. So I've entered into being an entrepreneur, and it's been quite a journey. And I'd love to share some of that today. But I think in the beginning, I started out probably quite typically in a small architectural practice in Melbourne, Australia, working on residential projects. But probably quite unusual at the time was I was working at the same time on master plan and urban design projects. So very early on, I had this window into the small scale crafting of architecture and the larger scale impact of architecture. And I did love playing at those two different scales. But I think the fact that I had this window into the larger scale, I could see there's all these gaps in my knowledge. I'm drawing these blocks and moving them around and talking to communities about what's going to happen in 10, 15 years time. And I just knew I didn't know enough to really be credible in that conversation. So I guess I went on a bit of a journey to try and fill that gap. And that led me to London, working in London for the past 16 years and working at Grimshaw, London for almost 13 of those years. And yeah, I was drawn to working on larger and larger, more complex projects. And I think it's fair to say that over time, there was a gradual progression in growth. But at the same time, I was also thrown in the deep end and was really fortunate to work with some incredible people on some amazing projects. And I think because I've seen all these different scales over time, and I've worked with very large teams. At one point, we were a team of 100. And I've seen what it takes to run a team like that. And although I'd fallen into leadership roles over that time and it felt as though the progression to larger scale and more complex projects was fairly gradual, actually looking back, it was just thrown in and just going for it. And so I got to a point on a project where I just thought, we can't go through that grueling year again. I can't do it to myself. I can't do it to my team. I'm in a leadership position and I don't feel like I can change what's happening here because it's bigger than the project. It's bigger than, even though, again, we had an incredible client, incredible project, amazing people around us, seriously. And yet with all those things in place, it was still very, very hard. And I couldn't see myself repeating that grueling year. So I stepped outside of architectural practice to figure out, well, what is it that I can do to improve the way projects are run. And although I didn't know it at the time, I guess I was falling back on leadership is the thing I know that I'm skilled at. And I know that's the key to unlocking so much potential in projects and in teams and in businesses and in the built environment. So I figured that if that's the one thing I could try and shift and improve, then I think it could have a much bigger impact and improve the way we live, work, and play. And I'm especially interested in making sure that there's just a more diverse group of people stepping into leadership roles, and that those teams involved in creating these incredible projects aren't compromised along the way. Because I think certainly when you come out of architectural studies and you feel like you want to save the world, and you feel like design is the way to do that. And it partly is, but then you figure out actually it's design plus the leadership and curation of that throughout a very long period of time if we're talking about complex projects. So I guess where I'm coming from is I want to nurture that creativity, but then also give it this real business leadership sense at every stage of the way. So not just when you hit the leadership role a decade from when you graduate or something along those lines. Every step of the way, if you understand that this is my contribution that I could make and it's leading me in the right direction and it's leading the projects in a much better way, then I think we'll be more effective. I think we'll enjoy what we're doing. I think more people will step into the space and really be themselves and all of these things. So
brilliant. It makes total sense. Now, I'll be honest, I've fallen by accident into being a leader at times, and we're all human beings. I've sometimes thought, okay, I've led well in this example, and other times I've done it by the skin of my teeth, or not as good as I wanted. Now, as an architect, we talked about it a little bit before we went live. You might become an architect, you might get your ARB, then you become a project architect, and maybe you get given a part 1 or a part 2, and you're supposed to do this project. And that's what I'd like to talk about a little bit today, is the first time you start having leadership responsibilities. In your experience, Tania, are there maybe some common mistakes that people make, or are there some initial things you like people to think about when becoming a responsible or effective leader for the first time?
I think the most common thing is when you're first stepping into a leadership role, you've just, like, the day before you were doing everything, like all the hard yards in terms of the drawings, etc. And then suddenly you're in a leadership role. And so it's hard, first of all, it's hard to let go of all the things you were doing just yesterday anyway. Yeah. But also because there's this real sense of control. I know what I'm doing when I'm doing it. I don't necessarily know what I'm doing when I'm asking someone else to do it. So it's quite a transition to move into a leadership role, like a pure and simple leadership role. So I would urge you, if you're just stepping into this space, just accept that there's going to be this gradual relinquishing of responsibilities onto somebody else to do some of the hard yards. And for the fact that you won't know all the details, the further you step into a leadership role, the less detailed information you have. But then again, the bigger picture you have. So it's important that the more you step into this leadership role, you have to relinquish some of the control of the details, but still build the trust with the people around you that you can go and ask them for the details, because you need some of that context. But also understand that when you're stepping into leadership and you're seeing the bigger picture that you didn't necessarily before, you're sitting at a decision-making table, hopefully, or potentially, or at least invited sometimes. And with that context, because that's such important context that you now have, feel the need to share that with your team, because I think that there's just not enough of the right context being shared with teams in order for work to be done in the best way possible. So I think I think the initial stages of leadership are probably harder than when you fully step into the role, because when you initially step in, you're kind of straddling both sides. You've got all the information, all the details, you've done so much of it yourself, you've got all this control, you're probably a perfectionist, and yet you've got to walk over there and do a meeting and not understand what's going to happen for 2 or 3 hours, and that's really hard sometimes. And I think just accepting that is the transition that you need to make, and you can do it in a step-by-step way. It doesn't have to be like completely stepping away and abandoning ship. Yeah.
No, makes sense. And do you know what I was thinking as well? Because leadership by nature, I mean, is there a fixed definition for it, or can it be quite broad? Because a team leader probably needs to be, in one sense, a good leader, but equally it could be a BIM coordinator that's inspiring people to start using more Revit compliant models than I don't know, the MicroStation before. I mean, what's your definition of a leader in architecture?
I love this question, because for me, this is why I've named my company Ede Enablers, because I think a leader is an enabling role. So you curate information going up and back. So you're managing expectations for your client and your stakeholders outside of your project, and you're managing backwards to your team. And actually, you need your team to be managing up to you. And so you need to be the role model there about how you manage expectations in all directions, and be willing and draw it out from your team as well. So I very much see leaders as a curatorial role, an enabling role. So you're enabling your team to perform at their best. You're enabling your client to make the best decisions. You're enabling your stakeholders to have the best possible outcomes. And all of that requires such subtleties and nuances with how you deal with people, how you deal with the brief, how you like all of that just requires such a steady hand in a way, and such an eye for what can and can't work, or you have to shift gears, and all of that, all those sensibilities come when you I guess when you shift your mindset of I'm not someone who's going to dictate things, I'm going to enable things, and that changes the way you behave. Yeah.
Very interesting. So I agree, because so leadership is important, because you need to get people behind you, especially on these projects. And you touched upon it at the start that, you know, you get given the project, you've probably been previously all over that project like a project architect, you know that, and now you're delegating. But what people in architects, I'm sure a lot of it, you spend so much time learning to build buildings, get all the regulations and stuff. So how important then is leadership as a skill in your opinion? Can it push a project further, or equally have you seen it that if, for instance, there isn't a sense of leadership on the project, that it can actually slow down a project from being delivered?
Yeah, I mean, look, when I went to write my book, when I was trying to find my voice, because that was actually the whole reason for writing the book. It wasn't just to write a book. It was honestly to work out what is it that I can bring to the profession to shift gears. If I'm going to step outside of architectural practice, it needs to be worth it. What do I think I can offer, and where is my credibility going to be? And in researching this whole leadership thing, both inside and outside of the industry, it's really curious that if you look at why projects fail, there's a lot of research that says it's poor communication and it's poor management of accountabilities, which I completely agree with. But all of these things, and there's a whole list of things that happen, but those are the top two. And if you think about it, the leadership role can absolutely shape that, which has a pivotal role to play in the project success. And I think a lot of project success is determined in the early days of a project. And so this is where you really need some strong leadership that can see things ahead that haven't happened yet. And you can just understand the terrain you're working with. So you need a certain level of experience. You need the vision, like the ability to see a vision, hold a vision, and understand how that will play out. And in order to make these really good decisions in the beginning, before you've got the right information, so I think leadership is key to any project success. And that's why I'm so keen that people lead before they lead. And we develop this next generation of leaders that are more courageous, who can say, not necessarily just no to a client, but not now to a client, or this is why we're not going to do this now because of these reasons. I want to protect you on this. We're going to do a deeper dive into this one particular issue now, because it's less expensive for us to sort this out now than it will be down the track. It might be painful now, and no one on the team might want to think about it, but do you know what? It's the right thing to do. And so all of those managing expectations, and they're not easy conversations to have. But you need, so I'm really pushing for leaders to be more courageous and to bring themselves to the table. Like, I don't know this information. I don't have this technical knowledge. I was brought, my background is design. And so, okay, I don't have the technical knowledge. I'm going to bring someone in who does, and you're going to facilitate and enable that conversation. So I think this is it. Like, if you're a leader, people just assume, well, you've got to know everything. Well, no, you can't. I mean, it's impossible. Yeah. And especially in our profession, where there's just so many things at play. And I think just having that understanding of, no, but the leader isn't going to have to know everything, but they're going to figure out where the information is, and they're going to bring those people to the table. And that's not what has been happening up until now, really. So I think this is where there's a shift, and this is where more people can step up and say, well, I've got these people skills. I've got these abilities to understand, read the room and understand the team and understand what the client needs. Well, they're amazing skills. You should step into a leadership role if that's you, because we need more of that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's very, very important. Now, we touched upon earlier, okay, you've got to let things go and stuff, but the other part of being a leader is you've got to have conversations with people, and part of that can be saying, okay, we need to do this and that. But then sometimes as a leader, you have to correct things. You have to have that conversation. And if you're shy, I found that years ago, I know I talk for a living now all the time, but I used to be really nervous about confrontation because sometimes you need to have that conversation. And what I was going to say to you is, in terms of a leader, someone's thinking, oh, I'm more of a background person or anything. Is there some things that people can do to start getting into the leadership role, which suits a quieter demeanor or someone that doesn't like confrontation,
Yeah, I love that, because I'm also a champion for leaders don't need to be extroverts. I'm not an extrovert. I mean, I've written a book. I'm as introvert as they come. But I just, if I'm passionate about something, I will find my way to speak up. But it has taken me a long period of time. In fact, there was a period of time where my directors would say to me, look, Tania, I could see your expression throughout that design review, but you didn't say anything. Like, what's going on there? Like, what, you didn't say anything? And I was thinking at the time, well, it was so intimidating. There was no way I could speak up. It was just, so many egos at play and all these things. Although I wanted to say something which I thought was important, I just couldn't figure out a way to do it. So I've certainly had my moments where, honestly, it's just hard. But I do believe that leaders don't need to be extroverts, but you do have to play to your strengths. So if you're someone who's really shy about confrontation, I think it's just about saying, look, I'm going in with the intent to make this situation better. So if that means I'm going to have to pull this person aside and say, look, what you're doing is potentially damaging some other things that are happening, or potentially will limit what you're able to do in the future, and I don't want to see that for you. So I'm going to let's have a chat about this. And it's not a judgment on you, but I want to see this improve. That's going to help you. It's going to decrease your hours. It's going to help you build bonds with the rest of the team and all these things. I think it's about coming in with the right intent. So even if you're shy, just going, well, you know what? I care about this project and I care about this team. So I'm going to pick a quiet space and I'm just going to have a quiet conversation with this person because I care. And I think if you go in with that intent, you don't need to have bravado. You don't need to have, it's just that you care and you've picked a quiet moment, and you probably still need to have the right amount of coffee beforehand to really egg yourself up that you're doing the right thing. But I would still err on the side of that's the right thing to do. And you could even preface the whole thing with, look, I'm not comfortable with these types of conversations, but I really care about what's happening here. And that just puts it all on the table. And I think the more people we have in leadership roles having conversations like that, the better it will be, because it's not like there's an expectation of, this is the way we talk to our team. As a leader, that's the way you talk to it. No, there's so many different ways to talk to your team. And it's important that you find your own way to do that. And it doesn't mean standing up in front of a large crowd every time. In fact, sometimes it's really worthwhile to do the exact opposite and pull someone aside and really make them feel safe and seen and heard.
I agree. It's interesting. And when I say the word confrontation, I don't mean necessarily going into an argument. However, by the nature of a project, sometimes there's going to be disagreements or things that need to be done, and that frank conversation needs to be had. So no, I really understand what you're saying. I think that disarming honesty really helps, actually, because when you set the scene, usually that can calm things down. What I'm interested in, though, is because architecture, now one of the unfortunate scenarios of the industry is that as architects, you have clients, there are deadlines, and deadlines can be organized so that you're not doing all-nighters and stuff. However, a live project, sometimes things don't always go your way. Now, I mean, what's your perspective then as a leader in handling, for example, a very tricky deadline or an unfortunate thing that's come up in the project? How would you go about going through that tricky situation of being like, we kind of need to have a push on the project, but then you're also conscious that you don't want to work people into the ground because that's just not good for business?
Yeah, and that's in many ways why I had to pull out of the project I was in, thinking I can't see a way to manage this like in a sustainable way going forward. Because I do think that when leaders are setting up programs and knowing that there are these big mountains to climb, and you can see them ahead and they're coming and the whole team knows they're coming, and then there's always we'll take a little break afterwards, and then suddenly 10 things arrive that needed to get done instantly, and then the break just goes away. So I do think this is, again, back to this point of being a courageous leader. I do think we need leaders saying, you know what, this is just going to be completely up. We're completely up against it on this. We might have to do this push now, but what can we do? What can we do to make sure the decision making is speedy, to make sure that all the other things are in place so that it's not overly extended? We're doing the best we can with what we have.
Yeah.
I do think that as architects, we err on the side of furnishing our clients with 10 times more than they actually need. And I do think we can get better at saying, you know what, if we're going to help our clients make decisions, we're going to give them less, but give them higher quality, and we're going to give them the map of how to make the right decisions. I think that would be a much smarter way of working. But I know we've got some way to go to do that. So I do appreciate that in some situations you've worked so hard to prepare the right information and to make all the right decisions and to put the right support teams in place, and you've done everything, and yet you're still up against it for a 2-week period. Then I would say, like, a 2-week period, if it's acknowledged that you've done everything you can to make that as smooth and as pain-free as possible, then that's probably doable. But then immediately afterwards, you've got to then be so strong and say, we're not going to push our team for the next month after that, or at least the next 2 weeks. Or what do we need to put in place in order to help our client make decisions that's not going to put the pressure on our team, because that's just not helpful, especially on these projects that go on and on and on, because it just sets an expectation on the client side that they can ask and they will get 10 times what they need every single time. And although of course you want to over deliver for your client, but you also need to manage expectations. So I do think that as well, we've got this passion inside our teams that says, I can do this. And then it takes longer than you think, because it's hard to know some days. It really is. And if you're tired, things take longer, or you're waiting on somebody else to do something and they didn't deliver and you don't want to call them out and all of that stuff, then, I think there's just an element of you can't predict everything when it comes to time, especially when it's creative stuff. And I think then you've just got to have some backstops. What else can we, if we really had to pull something at the last minute off the delivery, what could we pull off? And just have those thoughts beforehand, have the negotiations just in case if we need to pull something out, what's it going to be? And then we'll prioritize that afterwards and things like that. So I know I might be making it sound easier than it is. I appreciate it's not easy, but just making strides towards being more courageous with your team. And equally to your leaders, if you're in the team going, I've just been asked to do this thing and it's on top of everything else, there's no way I can deliver it. But if you're not able to say it, then sometimes the leader's just not going to understand you can't deliver it. It might be that they don't want to hear. That's a different situation, but at least make it clear to them that this is something has to be compromised here, or what will be delivered will not be up to standard. And that's not a reflection on you. That's a reflection on how many things are going on. So, yeah.
I agree. I think that having been on both sides, there's been times when I've been a team player and I've been thinking, I wish I could talk about this, or when's my salary review going to come up and all this stuff. But also now I've been in the team leader position. I think usually there's good intentions there. Like you said, there's the rare exceptions, but usually there's good intentions there. But equally, when you run in with a project, you can forget stuff. And what I was going to ask you is that sometimes when I've been younger and maybe a bit more, new in the professional world and stuff, say now my review wasn't coming up, I start to get resentful, and then you kind of don't say anything, so you kind of burying this, it's building up. I mean, what would your advice be to someone who is under leadership but would like to bring something up with a leader? How is a good way to do it that you think will be received, hopefully, in the best light?
Yeah, I think that often the problem you have inside a team is that you don't have full context of things. And I think this has gotten me into trouble a few times, I have to admit, when I've thought I've understood the context and it was different. So I just think that if you've got some particular things you want to tackle with your leaders, just do what you can to kind of understand the bigger picture that might not be immediately clear to you. For example, your leader has instructed you to do something which you feel is wrong, But actually, when it comes down to it, you're not really sure where that's come from. Has it come from the client? Has it come from the stakeholders? So I think just doing what you can with the information, which I appreciate sometimes is limited. What can you do to understand the slightly broader picture of the question or the thing you would like to discuss? Yeah. And it might be that you can talk about it to someone else in the team, or, what do you know about this? Or I just want to make sure I've got a full understanding of that. And because I think when you approach a leader with, I don't think I've got all the right information here. I think it's along these lines, or I think it's along that, but I'm on this path and I'm really keen to do this. I'd love your opinion as to whether that is the right thing. I feel like I'm working really hard. I'm not sure I'm being seen and recognized, and I'd love to understand why. So I think it's just, if you come in with this, I'm not necessarily sure I've got all the context right. I think it might be this. Correct me if I'm wrong. It could be that. I think it's just understanding the frame of where you sit and where you want to be. And I think it's a little bit like that conversation we had about confrontation. If you just come in with this is my perspective, and I appreciate that my perspective might be limited at this point because I'm not in those decision-making circles, or I'm not in this wider team session, or whatever it might be. So I think if you just come in with that, understanding where your context or your frame of reference is, and that it might be limited, I think that's a good starting point. And I also think just acknowledging something about your leader, because or your team, like if you're seen as somebody who is observing and learning from others, then I think your leader would be more willing to share with you, because they can see, this is how you you seem to appreciate this, or I can see that's going to really benefit you. And so I think it kind of depends a little bit on the leader you're talking to. So just take a bit of a moment to understand, how it is they talk to you and how you'd like them to talk to you. And I would speak in the way you'd like them to talk to you, because you can be the role model for your leader. Absolutely.
I agree. It's very true. While we were talking, Anya says, fantastic topic. So thank you, Anya. Equally, if anyone here wants to drop a comment or a question to ask Tania while we have her, please do. I'm going to quickly bring up the link of where your stuff is. And I know you're going to tell everyone where in more detail about the book and all that stuff. But let's bring it up on the screen while I ask you another question, Tania. So what I was going to say, Tania, in particular, is that's a really good example about how then you can start to make yourself more seen to your team leader. Team leaders are not mind readers. You need to have that conversation. Now, in terms of leadership, you can be a leader without the title of team leader. And actually, you made a really good point that if you're doing stuff above and beyond, then actually maybe your team leader can start giving you more and more responsibilities to lead within the team. Do you have any maybe small practical tips for how someone can start doing that that's not seen as micromanaging, not seen as being bossy in the negative sense? How would you start to become a leader or do stuff which is good for leadership and leading others?
Yeah, I love this question. And I would first like to caveat by saying I don't want people to take on more workload just for the sake of it. But I do think, so don't take on more workload, but take on, but certainly start grabbing more responsibility in a really sustainable way, and try and make sure that that's being recognized around you as well. And I think that that's something I do say a lot about, is how you advocate for yourself, because I think, especially as women, we don't do it, but even just as a junior member of a team, you often feel like, well, nobody really understands and no one cares what I'm doing, but actually they should. So the more you can speak about the things you're doing, the better. But I think, I guess, to frame that, because, I like framing things. So in terms of the way I see the leadership role, the enabling role is to think about four key aspects. Yeah. And one of them is, and I think you can contribute to all of these four aspects before you are officially in the leadership role. And I think that's the conversation we're having here. So in terms of the first piece is really, for any project success, there needs to be a vision in place. And I'm not talking about something that's set in the beginning and it's set in stone and it's like, no, it's this thing that needs to evolve. And it needs to, the ownership of it can't just sit with one or two people, and it can't just sit in the design team. It needs to be much broader. So as any member of the team, you play a part in understanding that the importance of the vision and how you advocate for that in everything you're doing, because it will streamline decisions. It will help you make those the calls as to what comes off the list of things to do when there's a huge deadline and all of this stuff. So it's so important. And every single person on the team has a role to play. But I think especially when you're wanting to take on more responsibility, if you're seen as someone advocating for the vision, which helps on so many fronts, then that should be rewarded, in my opinion. And that absolutely paves the way for you stepping into a leadership role faster. So that's the first aspect, is understanding the importance of a vision and how you advocate for it. The second key thing is understanding that every project has a framework, and it needs to be this flexible thing that, yes, it's, it certainly has the program and the brief and the scope of work, etc., in there, and ways of procurement and all these things, but it's also ways of working, and your team needs to understand it. So again, if you've got a number of members of your team at all different levels, understanding that there's a framework in place that needs to evolve with the project, then you are going to be benefiting the leader, and you're going to become a more effective leader when you finally step into that role, because you've understood this framework is so important. And then the other side of this framework piece is understanding that there are really key accountabilities across the project. So you might be accountable for something before you're a leader. And I think that's something to embrace if that is the case. Make sure you're supported. Make sure it's the right thing to do. You might not have the right expertise. You might not have the right support, in which case you put your hand up and say, I'm happy to be responsible, but there's no way I should be accountable for that. And they're two different things. So I think, again, as somebody leading before you lead, you understand that accountabilities exist across the project, and that if you are working under someone who is accountable, then they're going to require different things from you. And if you can support them better, then you will be seen as such a key team member and someone who's able to step into that role in the future as well. So that's the second piece in terms of framework and accountability. The third piece is measuring what matters, because I'm all about not just understanding whether a project has succeeded at the very end. We've got to improve the way in which we go about delivering project and designing and developing and all that stuff. Yeah. So you need ways to understand whether you're on track at any point in the project. So again, as somebody who's thinking about a leadership role in the future, or wanting to really take on more responsibility and really contribute to a project, it's really going, what I want to be in charge of tracking some of this progress on the project. And it could be, there's all different ways to do it, but that's something to really to think about. And I also, on the flip side of that, is we're measuring things, but also being more comfortable to test and try things and fail. And I call it failing fast. I'm not talking about the project failing, obviously, but I'm talking about those things you can try, that shield study, or that thing you can do, this isolated piece of work for the entrance, or the this or the that, the things that are important. And you trial and you test it, and you have this, and there's a real culture of it's okay to fail, and that requires more than the leader to set that culture up. So I would say, again, stepping into that role of, I'm going to encourage my team members to want to fail at this thing in order to improve it, and to get the buy-in from the rest of the team. I think that's so key. And then the fourth factor is how you create really effective teams and high-performing teams, and how you nurture them. And anyone at any level can participate in that as well. Obviously, the leader plays such a key role in how teams feel appreciated, how they're performing. But as well, if you've got team members at every level who are looking out for others who are doing well, who are advocating for others, and then looking to be advocated for themselves as well, then it builds this incredible feedback loop, if you like, as to the way you can improve relations between teams. You can get to deadlines faster. You can pull back and do other things. So it's just a much better atmosphere to be working in if your teams have built this trust and all of this. So I think it's and then the final piece really is how you draw all the strands together, and managing expectations and being more courageous. And I think, again, anyone at any level can help the team be more courageous and to manage expectations up, down, sideways, and across, and all of that.
Wowza, Tanya, you made this podcast very easy for me with all these juicy nuggets. I'm just sitting back and making some mental notes for me. I'll be honest. I went inwardly reflecting on what you were saying while you were saying it, going, "Oh, okay, yes, that's true, that's true." So this is useful for me, as hopefully is useful for the audience, and like a little preview of what it'll be like to work with you. Now, while we were talking, um, Sadiqa offered some views and add some commentary, which I think is cool. So Sadiqa says that she thinks people management, and both internal and external, is the most sensitive and critical aspect to get a grip of, particularly as people pleaser and for those coming into leadership role. And secondly, letting go of perfectionism and control to allow others to grow. And that bit I really agree is really important. It kind of goes back a bit, Tanya, what you said before of not micromanaging, letting things go, trusting people can do it. I mean, what's your thoughts on what Sadiqa has said? Do you have any comments
Oh,
or
this is
things you'd
brilliant.
add?
I can completely relate to, and I think many of us can, in terms of people pleasing, especially when you're stepping into leadership roles. You feel so grateful that someone's given you this opportunity. And then you feel like you've got to so please the client and so please the stakeholder and so please the team. And of course, you're the last person you end up pleasing, by the way, and you end up working yourself into the ground. And so this is kind of where I'm coming from with being more courageous, because part of that, in fact, a lot of it is then saying, I'm going to serve my client, but I'm also going to tell them where they're going off course.
Yeah.
And I'm going to serve my stakeholders, but I'm really going to show them a better way. And I do think that if you take the idea of a leader being an enabler, you're kind of showing what's possible. And part of that is not always saying yes and not always saying it's all so rosy. Yes, you need to be positive, but I think you also need to be clear about those moments of, okay, we're going into a really tough phase now. We're going to get pushback from the client and the stakeholders, and this is going to be hard. We're going to have to make some tough decisions, and we're not always going to enjoy the decisions we're making. But if we've got our vision in place and we know this thing we're trying to do, and we've got this support of this fast failure culture, we've got each other's back, we've built this trust, then we will get through this tough phase. And I do think that, moving away from just people pleasing, because actually, if you go into more, how am I going to serve the outcome to be the best? How am I going to serve the team to produce the best journey and outcome? And if you have that mindset, it's not about pleasing everyone all the time. It's actually just about that longer term view. There might be a bit of short term pain, but acknowledging and really being clear, this is going to be a tough couple of months.
Yeah.
But we're going to get through it because we've put all these things in place, and you can absolutely shout at us after these 2 months if we don't get these other things in place to make this better. But I think you can't have those conversations if you're simply aiming to look good and please all the time, because there will be moments where it just doesn't go your way, or something comes from left of field, which although you've planned for something, it didn't go the way you thought. Yeah, and I think that also plays to that second point of being a perfectionist and having a bit of control, because I can totally relate to that. I think many of us can. And I think there's something that we get trained in design, in architecture schools, don't we? That we keep going until somebody tells us it's good enough. And we are our own worst enemy when it comes to being a perfectionist. But at the same time, we're seeking others to tell us everything's good. So I think, again, it comes back to, if as a team, you've got this really strong vision and it might not be visible to others yet, but if it's visible to you and you're doing what you can to really share that vision, then eventually people will, and if it's the right thing to do, by the way, then eventually others will come along. So I think it's this, not necessarily, it is kind of letting go of things, but at the same time, it's holding that bigger vision and seeing things before others see it, and just being confident that you're heading in the right direction, and that people will eventually like it when they see it. They just can't see it just yet. That's the issue. Yeah.
Fair enough. Well, thank you, Sadiqa, for sharing and adding
A
your
brilliant
views to
question.
the live
Yeah,
stream.
you.
Very, very good. Now, we have had another question that's popped in from a user on Twitch. My goodness, we normally don't get many users from Twitch, which says, "Is Ede Enablers a business that gets work permits for projects and lobbies politicians to greenlight projects?" My goodness. And I don't think that's what Ede Enabler is. So Tanya, maybe this is a nice segue.
I know, but I love that that's a provocation, isn't it?
Yeah, it's
if
a
I'm
cool
going to
one.
enable things, I might as well enable the right projects to be going through, right?
Yeah, well, maybe one day, but for now, tell us what you're focused on right now.
So I'm focused on developing and supporting leaders, like existing leaders who wanting and know that there's a better way, but also next gen leaders, because I do believe that leading before you lead now will can you imagine, Stephen? We've got a situation where our next gen leaders are so primed and ready to be courageous, to take a stand, to do the right thing, to support their teams, do amazing work for their clients, and to love their job again. Honestly, I think that's where it's at for me. So I do think that our existing leaders need more help, and it's hard to ask for help, and I appreciate that. But again, if I can help the next gen leaders stepping up to say, look, I understand your leadership role, and I'm prepared to step in and take some of those things from you to support you. And if I can also help existing leaders to really understand how it is that they can lighten their load and smooth out the process, shall we say, then I'm happy days. I'm doing what I need to be doing, frankly.
I think it's great. And you've got this book here as well, Tanya. Tell us about the book, because I think a book is a great way to get a lot of information out to the masses. And you probably spent a lot of time on this, and you touched upon it earlier. I can see there's a quote from Sir Nicholas Grimshaw. However, in your words, tell us about the book.
So honestly, this started out as a means to find my voice. And what I did was understand, okay, so leadership is the thing I feel confident about, but what is it that I can take from the small scale projects that I've worked on to the large scale and draw the strands together to make leadership more effective, more effortless, so that more people can step into the space and lead. And so that when they do step in, it's just such an enjoyable process. You can be guaranteed of the project outcome being a success because you've put all the right steps in place, and you can guarantee that your team are going to love being part of it, and that you're absolutely developing the next gen leaders in the process as well. So this is why I'm focusing on leadership, and this is why you do need to find your own leadership style. So this is a framework of tools and strategies that you can use. Yeah, and so it touches on those 4 aspects, and plus the 5th one of how you tie it all together. So it's written in a way, it's kind of conversational. It's written as though I could be sitting opposite you in a coffee shop talking about some experiences. So I share my own stories. I've looked at some leaders inside and outside of the industry, and I share their stories too. So it is multiple voices in there. And multiple experiences. I share successes and failures, and I know it's hard to do, but it's important to do. Yeah. So I think and I've been told that it's so relatable in terms of the way I write it and the stories that I share, that people are nodding as they're reading, basically. So I think it's hopefully written in a really accessible way. But I appreciate that not everybody loves to read a book. So there's a webinar. If you can just look on my links, and you can see there's this free webinar for an hour where I talk about what this framework is and how you can change some things you're doing today. And I talk a lot about vision, as you can see there as well. So yeah, there's content out there. I also run a 6-week course where you do 10 to 15 minutes a day on this app, and you get me once a week in a group. And yeah, it's been amazing fun as well. So yeah, there's lots of different resources. There'll be more to come as well. But I'm really here to develop and support leaders. Yeah,
I love it. Well, I think I need to pick up the book too as well, to be honest. So I will be looking at the book, and I'll add a link to the Architecture Social. Now I've got 1 or 2 little comments that have come in before you get to ask me questions. Chris says, do you advocate formal training from when architects are promoted to leadership role, as many rely on learning on the job, which has its positive and negatives? PS. Tanya, you are great, and everyone should read your book. Well, there you go. Wow, Chris.
Oh, thank you, Chris.
You need to put Chris on there underneath your Grimshaw, you know? It's a quote. It's a quote for your website.
Absolutely, I'll take it. I'll take it. Yeah, so I do absolutely advocate, because everyone at every level should want to continue to learn. I think you'll have this. I guess there's a culture of, once you've made it to a leadership position, you can stop learning. Well, frankly, actually, when you look at other industries, and actually I've been looking into and basically having mentors from some of the most successful people on the planet, not necessarily in our profession. In fact, most of them aren't. And all of them really understand this idea of learning continuously, and they all have mentors, no matter how successful they are. So I think we need to, in our industry, we need to sort of shed this idea that asking for help or having a mentor or learning is something bad. Actually, it's something brilliant, and it shows your curiosity. It's going to expand your horizons, and it'll mean that it's easier for you to invite others into your world to be more diverse, because you understand that actually having someone else's opinion who wouldn't otherwise have shared it, or you wouldn't have otherwise thought about, could be a really, really important thing for your project or your team, or a moment in time for you in your career. So I think just being open to this, the idea of being curious about learning, is so important. And so this is why I'm determined with leadership things to make them so accessible and easy to fit into some busy schedules. And there's no sense in it being like this heavy textbook that no one wants to read, or a course that you've got to move away from your team and abandon them for a couple of weeks. There's no point in that, because I just don't think anyone would want to do it, and they don't get anything out of it anyway. So I'm determined that there are ways and means that you can continue to learn, but in a way that's accessible to you and that fits your lifestyle.
Very well said. Well, thanks, Chris, for sharing. I appreciate it. And Tanya, that is a good response. Mariola says, great insight. Thank you. Now, Tanya, it's your turn to flip the script and ask me any questions that you have, which are unplanned and unscripted. Go for it. Do you have any questions for me?
Well, I'd love to know your because you are seeing where people come to you, they want to change parts of their career, or they want to progress, or they want to progress because they haven't been promoted, and they want to move into these leadership positions. What is the typical conversations they're having with you about the things they're struggling with, or the things they think, should I be asking for this? That kind of thing.
Yeah, interesting. So in terms of specifically recruitment, so usually people come to a recruitment consultant when the conversation has gone too far, or maybe I should say hasn't began. Therefore, the person has decided that they want to leave. Usually conversations will be about responsibility and salary, and location's a big thing when you're looking. But when I go into the crux of why people are looking, it's very common that they feel that there's nowhere they can grow further, or they've tried to have a conversation with management and they've been glossed over. Now, you only hear one side of the coin. However, to answer your question, it is a big part of why people leave. And what I would say as a leader, I think that, of course, it's stressful. Of course, they're running with the ball. But when you lose these people, when they're gone, they're gone. And it's very expensive to replace someone. I mean, that can just make running a difficult project even worse. Tanya, you mentioned earlier you had these big projects with lots and lots of people. And now, without being specifics, I'm sure if you had a team of 20 and 2 or 3 decided that they would leave mid-project, that is a big disruption. So I do think it's good to keep the conversations going. And I do think that if there is a chance for a team leader to keep their employees, they should. Equally, the thing I always like to remind people who are job seeking is, before you even go out in the wild, are you sure you don't want to have that final conversation with your current team leader? Because maybe they are just too busy, and maybe if you express how important it's getting to you, maybe they could have that conversation. At the same time, though, if you've done that and nothing's happened, then you do have to, in my opinion, as the person working on the team, have the ugly conversation with yourself of like, right, do I accept that I've brought stuff up and nothing's got done and stay here? or do I leave? However, if you haven't brought up that conversation, especially during a busy project, then I think usually the team leader is just, as you said earlier, you said it perfectly. There's a big picture. They're running with the ball. They will get around to you, but they forget. And by bringing how important it is, you save that whole process. And there's nothing worse than going all the way down the process in the recruitment period where you've accepted the job, you're going to go, and then you give your notice and your current team leader is like, what the heck are you doing? You have to stay. We'll give you the more money. We'll give you this and that. And then you're in the really tricky position of, do I still go or do I stay? And usually, in my experience, when you stay at a company, within 3 to 6 months, those things don't change if they've been promised. So you have to get them, because if things are coming, then, you know, they don't. But so that's a roundabout answer. But what I'm trying to say, to summarize it, is always have a conversation with your team leader, but express how important it is. I know it's difficult, but that is better than spending a lot of energy looking for a job, going down the process, only then to be in a tricky scenario where maybe you stay, maybe you go. I mean, what do you think, Tania? Does that make sense?
I think it does. And again, this comes back to this point of advocating for yourself, which I know can be so, so hard. And also, if you just wait for the formal review process that I'm sure many practices and all practices should have, but if you just wait for those moments, sometimes the build up to those reviews can be just so
overbearing.
Just overbearing, yeah, because oftentimes it should have happened at 6 months, it didn't happen, and suddenly now it's 12 months, and you've logged, like, you sort of backed up all this stuff you wanted to say. Now it's 12 months worth of stuff you want to get out, and it's probably not going to come out in the right way because it's been building up. So, and I know it's hard to do, but if you can find those moments to have those conversations about, oh, I really like this today, or that was amazing, I'm really proud I did that, what did you think? And it can just be like a 30-second thing or a 1 minute. But if you have a few of those, you'll build confidence to have more of them. And it just takes the edge off the reviews, because the reviews can just be too much pressure.
Yeah.
But just another point, that this came up in a conversation with an architectural practice, and there was this feeling that it's a large practice. Is there a way that anyone coming in at any level can just see the different paths they can take? Is there any way that could be more visible, so that there isn't this tension that builds up, so that, you know, yes, you can't map out every career in every practice. You can't, like, it's going to look like some weird spider diagram. But at the same time, what could be done? What could practices do to make career paths more transparent? I'd love to know what you think about that.
It's hard. I go through salary brackets, salary bandings with companies, pathways. I think the more you can put it out there, the better. I don't think a lot of companies do it. I understand, because they can be quite big. There's a lot of policies, but the more and more transparent things are on the internet, the better. So for a leader, I would encourage it. So in my company, not architecture related, because we're not designing projects. However, I've got everything quite visible on what people need to achieve to get promoted, really. So it's all there on the internet. It says, if you bring in this much work and you have these core values, you're eligible for promotion, full stop. And therefore, in line with it, the salaries are all in the open. So bizarrely here, everyone talks about money. Everyone knows what salary they're on. And it's quite liberating. But what I think happens in architecture practices is that there's a salary bracket, but someone's been there 10 years, they're still on the same thing, and then someone joins on, and you've got different factors, and it can get very blurry. I think the more out there is, the better it is. And you touched upon earlier reviews. I think that sometimes people ask for money, or without necessarily justifying that extra worth. And I always say to try to bring it back to responsibilities with remuneration. So just asking for £5,000 more with giving your team leader nothing else for it, that's a more difficult conversation. However, if you said, I will be the BIM coordinator on the team, and I will be responsible for this documentation and this and this and that, and in line with that, can we look at increasing my salary more closer to a BIM coordinator in London? I think you're more likely going to help that project manager, team leader, then give you the salary increase. And so a lot of my time, especially doing career coaching, is all about this. But Tania, what do you think? Does that make sense, my logic?
It does. It does. And I also think you can flip it and say, if you don't quite know what it is you need to do to earn more and to gain those responsibilities, if you can just have that conversation, like what are the top 3 to 5 things that I need to be doing, that I will put my energy into doing. It doesn't mean it's extra. It just means I'm diverting my energy into these things because I know it's going to be good for the practice, for the project, for the team, and my own career. And I'm okay with saying all of that because it's important. Everyone has this idea that they are valuable and that they're making a contribution, and that there's a little bit of selfishness in there as well. Absolutely. But it needs to be that there's, this what is valuable, and understand it from both sides. Yeah,
excellent. Okay, well, I think on that note, we're fastly approaching the hour mark and we've covered a lot. So I'm going to say that if anyone else has a question, then they can probably get in touch with you. So I did bring in your website earlier, and then we'll get it up again. However, for our audio listeners as well, can you tell us exactly where they can find you, Tania, on the wide web?
So you can follow me on LinkedIn, Tania Ihlenfeld. I'm also on Instagram. You can follow my company, Ede Enablers. That's Ede Enablers. And I'm open to conversations and coffee chats or whatever. I'm here to support. So yeah.
That's very good of you. Well, thank you, Tania, for being here, and stay on the stage while I close this down. But thank you in the audience for joining us and participating. It's always cool when I've got some questions as well. It gives me a moment to have a little bit of water. But also, I just do like it when it gets a bit more interactive. I have got some more content coming up in the next few weeks. But if you enjoyed this one, do share it. Do get in contact with Tania and all that cool stuff. But thank you so much. I'll let you go back to work, but hopefully this has been useful for any of you aspiring leaders. I really do appreciate it. And we got another thank you before we go.
And thank you for having me, Stephen. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you, Tania. Stay on the stage while I end the live stream now. But take care, everyone, and see you soon.